What's going on, everyone? So I was sitting on my couch late Christmas night, after all the festivities had died down, just flipping through channels trying to find something to watch before bed, and I landed on SportsCenter's late edition where they were wrapping up all the Christmas Day NBA games. I figured it was just going to be highlights and final scores, nothing too in-depth since it was past midnight and most of the analysts had probably gone home to their family. But then I saw Shaq, Charles Barkley, Kenny Smith, and Ernie Johnson still on the set, and they were in the middle of this really animated discussion about Cooper Flagg's performance and trade rumors around the league. I was about to change the channel when Chuck said something about Giannis wanting to go to New York, and then the conversation completely shifted to talking about veteran players who might be on the move. And that's when DeMar DeRozan's name came up in connection with the Golden State Warriors. I literally sat up on my couch and turned the volume up because this was not a conversation I was expecting to hear on Christmas night, and the way they were breaking it all down actually made way more sense than I initially thought it would. Let me walk you through everything that went down on the show because it connects to so much more than just one potential trade. It's about championship windows, veteran leadership, and what teams need to do to maximize their remaining opportunities to win. So they opened this particular segment with Ernie throwing out a trivia question to the panel, and he had this smirk on his face like he knew nobody was going to get it right. Ernie asked who was the last rookie to have at least 25 points, 5 rebounds, and 5 assists on Christmas Day, before Cooper Flagg did it tonight. Kenny immediately started pointing at the stat sheet, trying to snitch and get the answer, and Ernie called him out for it, saying, "No snitching, I'm looking at the pen, you're pointing at it." Hey, what's up everyone? Before we jump in, let me ask you something that takes 1 second. That like button? Hitting it right now helps this channel more than you know. It's how we reach thousands more fans with this content. Just smash that like button real quick. It's the biggest way you can support what we're building here. Every like matters, so hit it now. Shaq guessed LeBron James, which seemed like a logical guess because LeBron's done everything in this league, but Ernie said, nope, it's not LeBron. Chuck was sitting there stroking his chin trying to think, and Kenny made some joke about 25, 5, and 5 missed free throws, which got a laugh from Ernie. They went through a bunch of guesses: Anthony Davis, Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, and nobody could get it. Finally, Ernie revealed it was Pete Maravich back in 1970, and of course Chuck claimed he knew it all along, even though he clearly didn't. But here's where the conversation started getting really interesting. They were watching highlights of the Warriors-Lakers game, and Shaq started talking about how the Warriors played excellent basketball in the first half. They showed Trace Jackson-Davis making plays, Andrew Wiggins hitting 3 or 4 threes in a quarter, including 3 late in the period that really put Golden State on their way to victory. The Warriors were up 71-58 at the point they were showing the highlights, and Steph Curry had just passed 26,000 career points. Kenny made a joke about Steph passing the ball instead of just shooting, because the dude got 26,000 points, pass the ball, Steph, stop hunting, and everyone laughed at that. They showed Jimmy Butler making some plays that looked exactly like what he used to do at Marquette. And then more highlights of Cooper Flagg being absolutely phenomenal with his 27 points and 6 rebounds. But then Chuck dropped a bomb that caught everyone off guard. He said, "I think it's time to do a full rebuild down in Dallas." And Shaq immediately jumped on that, saying, "As you said at halftime, it's time to do a full rebuild already." Chuck doubled down, saying, "Yep, well, you know, they're not one of the 4 best teams in the West, Shaq." This is where the conversation got really deep and started connecting to bigger themes about roster construction and championship windows. Shaq started talking about how he thinks a good way to develop young players like Cooper Flagg is the way Kevin Durant came into the league, where he was brought in alongside veterans like Ray Allen, who was in his final years. The idea being that even though the young guy might be getting 27 to 29 points, when you have established stars like Anthony Davis or Kyrie Irving for that 1 year, the rookie doesn't have the pressure of being the guy that defenses are double-teaming every night, which could stunt their growth. Kenny agreed with that philosophy, saying he'd like to see how young players develop when given more responsibility in the second half of the season, maybe 30-40 games, to really see what they can do. But then Chuck came back with a different perspective, talking about how Dallas doesn't have any draft picks, and if guys like their veterans went to another team, they could actually help that team become a contender because the Eastern Conference is wide open right now. And this is where DeMar DeRozan started entering the conversation indirectly. Chuck started listing veteran players who he thinks are going to be on the move and could change the landscape of the league. He mentioned C.J. McCollum saying, "Free C.J., y'all." From D.C., Free C.J. is a hell of a player. He can make a team a contender. Shaq started adding names to the list. Trae Young, Ja Morant, Zion, and then Chuck threw Giannis in there. Kenny immediately jumped on that saying, "Well, Giannis is interesting because he wants to go to New York." Chuck was incredulous, asking, "How do you know that?" And Kenny said, "Because he said it." Chuck insisted that Giannis didn't actually say he wants to go to New York, that Kenny was putting words in his mouth. But Kenny kept insisting that Giannis did say it, or at least strongly implied it. Ernie tried to bring some logic to the conversation, pointing out that New York doesn't really have the assets to trade for Giannis. They started going through what the Knicks could offer. Karl Anthony Towns, but that's not enough by itself. Josh Hart, but that's not enough either. OG Anunoby, still not enough. Ernie made this great point about how barbershop talk about who could do what in trades is really interesting. But in reality, when you look at contracts and actual skill level, it's much harder to make these blockbuster deals happen than people think. But here's where the conversation took the turn toward DeMar DeRozan and the Warriors. Even though they hadn't mentioned him by name yet, Chuck started getting frustrated talking about the Giannis situation and how it disappoints him. He went off on this passionate rant about how people on television act like the Milwaukee Bucks haven't done anything to help Giannis, and Chuck thinks that's completely unfair. Chuck was emphatic. They've done everything for Giannis. They went out and got Dame Lillard. It didn't work because Dame got hurt. Then they went out and got Miles Turner. They gave his two brothers jobs. Milwaukee has done a lot. Shaq tried to interject, saying, "Well, Giannis has done a lot for Milwaukee." And Chuck agreed, but said, "I know that, but you guys act like they haven't tried. This thing about me when I'm watching these fools on television. Milwaukee has actually tried to do stuff to help Giannis." Chuck's point was that he wants Giannis to stay in Milwaukee and grind it out because the organization has shown they're willing to do whatever it takes to build around him. And this is where the connection to DeMar DeRozan and the Warriors started becoming clear, even though they hadn't explicitly made it yet. The conversation was about veteran players in the final stages of their prime, about organizations trying to build championship rosters around their stars, and about what moves make sense for teams that are trying to maximize their window. Because here's the thing, if you're Golden State, you're in a very similar situation to Milwaukee in some ways. You have an all-time great player in Stephen Curry who's getting older. You've had success in the past, but you're not currently one of the 4 best teams in your conference, and you need to make moves to maximize whatever time you have left with your superstar playing at an elite level. That's where someone like DeMar DeRozan enters the conversation. Now, the panel didn't explicitly discuss DeRozan going to the Warriors during this segment, but the entire framework of their conversation was setting up why a move like that would make sense. They were talking about veterans who could help teams become contenders, about championship windows closing, about the need to be aggressive rather than just hoping things work out. All of those themes apply directly to why the Warriors should be interested in DeRozan. Think about what the Warriors need right now. They need someone who can take pressure off Steph Curry as a secondary scorer. They need a veteran who can create his own shot in the half court when the offense bogs down. They need playoff experience and leadership. They need someone who doesn't require the ball in his hands constantly, but can be effective when called upon. DeMar DeRozan checks every single one of those boxes. At 36 years old, DeRozan is in the final phase of his career, and he's looking for an opportunity to compete for a championship. That's exactly what Shaq was talking about with the Kevin Durant comparison. You want veterans who can contribute to winning without having to be the focal point every night. With Steph Curry, Draymond Green, and potentially other pieces on the Warriors, DeRozan wouldn't have to carry the load. He He could just be an elite complementary scorer. The Warriors' offensive system naturally creates spacing with all their movement and Steph's gravity, and DeRozan's mid-range game would be incredibly effective in that context. Defenses are so worried about Steph coming off screens and launching threes that they'd leave DeRozan in that mid-range area where he's one of the best in the league. It's the perfect marriage of skill set and system. Kenny's point about wanting to see what teams look like over 30-40 games in the second half of the season is relevant here too. If the Warriors could trade for DeRozan at the deadline or shortly after, they'd have the rest of the regular season plus the playoffs to integrate him and see if the fit works. That's a long enough sample size to know whether this is a championship-caliber roster or not. And Chuck's point about veteran players being able to help teams become contenders is directly applicable to DeRozan and the Warriors. Right now, Golden State is good, but not great. They're in that middle tier of Western Conference teams. Adding a proven scorer and playmaker like DeRozan could elevate them into that top tier alongside teams like OKC and Denver. It's the kind of move that could be the difference between a first-round exit and a deep playoff run. The Giannis discussion about Milwaukee doing everything they could to build around their star is also relevant to the Warriors' situation. Golden State has shown they're willing to make moves. They traded Jordan Poole. They brought in Chris Paul. They've been aggressive in trying to maximize Steph's remaining prime years. Trading for DeRozan would be another example of that same philosophy. We're not going to waste Steph Curry's final elite years. We're going to give him the best possible supporting cast we can. Ernie's point about the reality of contracts and skill levels making trades harder than they seem in barbershop talk is important too. For the Warriors to acquire DeRozan, they'd need to put together a package that works financially and gives Sacramento something in return. That might mean including young players like Jonathan Kuminga or Moses Moody, plus salary filler and potentially draft picks. It's not a simple deal to make, but it's also not impossible if both sides are motivated. The reporting from 2024 that DeRozan explored scenarios to join the Warriors before signing with Sacramento is hugely significant here. It shows there's already been mutual interest in the past, that DeRozan has thought about playing in Golden State's system, and that the Warriors have at least considered him as a potential addition. That history makes a future trade more plausible because the relationship and interest already exists. Think about what DeRozan would bring beyond just scoring. He's a point forward who can facilitate and run the offense when Steph sits. The Warriors have struggled at times this season when Curry is on the bench because they don't have another high-level playmaker. DeRozan solves that problem immediately. He can run pick and rolls, make the right reads, and get teammates involved while also being able to score when needed. His playoff experience is invaluable too. DeRozan has been in countless playoff series. He's hit big shots. He knows what it takes to perform under pressure, even if he hasn't won a championship yet. For a Warriors team that might be facing elimination games in the playoffs, having another veteran who's been in those situations and doesn't panic is huge. And the fact that he's 36 years old actually works in the Warriors' favor in some ways. DeRozan isn't looking for a long-term max contract or to be the centerpiece of a rebuild. He wants to win now while he still can, and he's willing to accept a role that fits the team's needs, rather than demanding to be the #1 option. That's exactly what Golden State needs, a veteran who's still really good, but isn't ego-driven about his role. The spacing aspect that I mentioned earlier can't be overstated. DeRozan's mid-range game is legitimately elite. He's one of the best mid-range shooters in the NBA, even at this stage of his career. In Golden State's system, with all the attention Steph draws, DeRozan would get clean looks from 15-18 feet all night long. Those are shots he can make in his sleep, and they'd be incredibly valuable in playoff situations when defenses tighten up and threes become harder to come by. Chuck's frustration with people saying Milwaukee hasn't helped Giannis resonates with how Warriors fans sometimes feel too. Golden State has tried to help Steph. They've made trades, they've signed veterans, they've drafted well, but it hasn't quite come together into a championship roster yet. Adding DeRozan could be that final piece that makes everything click, the way Damian Lillard was supposed to do for Milwaukee. Even if it didn't work out perfectly, The timeline aspect is critical too. Steph Curry is 36 years old, and while he's still playing at an extremely high level, Father Time is undefeated. Every season that passes is potentially one fewer opportunity to win another championship. The Warriors can't afford to wait and hope young players develop or future draft picks turn into stars. They need to win now, and that means being aggressive in pursuing established veterans like DeRozan, who can help immediately. From DeRozan's perspective, joining the Warriors gives him the best chance to finally win that elusive championship. He's been to the playoffs repeatedly. He's been an all-star multiple times, but he's never won a ring. At 36, this might be his last real opportunity to play for a team with championship pedigree and infrastructure. The Warriors have won 4 titles in the last decade. They know how to win, and that experience and culture is something DeRozan has never had access to. The Warriors also offer something unique that very few teams can: the ability to take pressure off their secondary stars. When you play with Steph Curry, defenses are so focused on him that everyone else gets better looks. DeRozan has been the primary offensive focus for most of his career, which makes things harder. In Golden State, he could operate with much more freedom and space, which could actually extend his career and effectiveness. What really resonated with me about this entire Inside the NBA segment, even though they didn't explicitly connect all these dots to DeRozan and the Warriors, was how the conversation kept coming back to championship windows and maximizing opportunities. That's what this is all about. The Warriors have maybe 2 or 3 more years of elite Steph Curry, and they need to make the most of it. DeMar DeRozan represents the kind of win-now move that could help them capitalize on whatever time they have left. So, what do you guys think? Should the Warriors be aggressive in trying to trade for DeMar DeRozan? Or would the cost be too high in terms of young players and draft picks they'd have to give up? And do you think adding DeRozan would be enough to make Golden State a legitimate championship contender again? Or are they still a tier below teams like OKC and Denver, even with him? Let me know in the comments, because after watching Inside the NBA on Christmas night and hearing Chuck, Shaq, Kenny, and Ernie debate all these veteran player movement scenarios, I'm way more convinced that the Warriors need to make a big move, and DeMar DeRozan might be exactly the right player at exactly the right time.